Sammy and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read throughout the month of April. So the first book I read in the month of April was America Is Not the Heart by Elaine Castillo. I've actually talked about this book multiple times on my channel already, but this book revolves around a woman named Hero who is kind of shunned by her family and is forced to leave the Philippines and move to the Bay Area of California to her uncle's house there. And it's about her kind of forming a close friendship with her cousin who is 7 years old, and her name is Roni, and it's about them kind of as two counterparts. There's Roni, who is young and has only grown up in America, and then there's Hero, who is a woman in her 30s and grew up in the Philippines and is just now moving to America, and those two very different experiences. I think this book is really good and a really good starting point if you wanted to start getting into Filipino or Filipino-American literature. I think this is a really good choice to start with. It was a good read, an easy read, and very entertaining. The food references I've already mentioned, they're so good, and it's like all throughout this book, and it's the food is almost its own character in this book, and if you've had Filipino food and you love Filipino food, this will make you like salivate while you read, and if you've never tried Filipino food, you'll probably want to after reading this book. The only critique I have for this book, I think, is that there were several pieces of the plot or of the story that had potential for more depth if they had been expanded upon, but they weren't, and they were kind of just grazed on the surface level. So I wish that those had had more focus and some other parts of the narrative had less focus, the ones that were like not as important to the theme and plot of this book. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, but it's more like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The second book I read in April is Watching You by Lisa Jewell, and I actually don't have that with me because I gave it to my sister for her to read, so yeah, I don't have it with me, but it was really good. I really enjoyed it. It is a thriller based in Bristol, England, and it starts with a murder, and you don't know who was murdered and you don't know who the murderer was, but you get like a snapshot of a dead body, and then it jumps back to before the murder happened, like way before, and focuses on a group of people who all live in the same neighborhood, and it's like this wealthier neighborhood in Bristol. Kind of revolves around how they all are connected to one another and the assumptions that they make about each other as they observe one another, and you as the reader are observing and making assumptions and trying to figure out who did it and who is like you're supposed to be suspicious of. And I just really enjoyed it. It's so fun to read. I really recommend it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Bodily Harm by Margaret Atwood, and I did not like this book. I ended up DNFing this book and giving it 1 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I made it almost 200 pages out of 291 pages of this book and just decided I was not going to waste any more time reading it. I am very sad that I did not like it because I did really enjoy The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I think the only redeeming quality about this book is her writing and how beautiful it is, but it wasn't enough to save this book, like, at all. This story revolves around a woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer and had a partial mastectomy, and she's kind of grappling with her mortality, so she wants to escape and asked her boss at her magazine, because she writes for a travel magazine, if she can go to this island and write an article about that island. But the island that she goes to is horrible, and I don't know who would be going on a trip there for fun, but yeah, I don't know. She like goes to this island, and it's in the middle of a political upheaval and election, and there's sketchy people everywhere. Everything about this place is horrible and awful. The food's awful, the places are awful and dirty, and she's like having a miserable time, and she's miserable, but she is staying there anyway, despite having elected to go there, and then she meets these people, and 5 seconds after meeting them agrees to do like sketchy favors for them, and it just didn't make any sense, and I just hated it. It was dreadfully boring, and I was really disappointed in this one. So after reading Bodily Harm, I picked up My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Talent, and this book, I kind of loathed this book too. This book was nothing like what I was expecting it to be. When I first read the synopsis of this book in my April TBR video, I kind of got the vibe that it would be kind of like a girl raised by wolves archetype of like Turtle Alveston is this girl who kind of grew up outside of the social norm, but she's quirky, and just kind of a coming of age novel. And this was absolutely dark. Trigger warnings everywhere, content warnings everywhere, and I was just not expecting it, and it was just kind of jarring. But it revolves around a girl named Turtle Alveston whose mother passed away, and she's raised by her father, who is described as charismatic, and tortured. Trigger warnings for incest, rape, pedophilia, child molestation, violence, animal brutality, extremely profane language, and I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting at the moment, but it was just a lot. And despite that, there are some times where literature can contain those things, those elements, and still have like meaning, and this to me just lacked that. The character development was lacking immensely. Everything was kind of gratuitous, and on top of that, it seemed that the writing was slightly pretentious. There were times, well, there were a lot of times, quite frequently throughout the novel, where kind of like these artistic and philosophical references would be kind of just thrown in there in dialogue that was not only jarring but really unbelievable to me, and it just took me out of the story. And it kind of just seemed to be there to show that the author knows these things, like knows these philosophies and philosophers and these artists and these songs and these theories, and like, I don't know, but that's just how it came across, and I just didn't really enjoy it all that much. There was like a piece in the middle where I was really engrossed in the story and cared a little bit, so I did end up giving this a 2 out of 5 stars, but ultimately I just really did not enjoy this one, unfortunately. So after reading My Absolute Darling and absolutely hating it, I wanted something that was not as heavy in topic, and I decided to pick up the first YA book that I've read in a really long time, and that is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. I loved this so much. I read it in one day. It revolves around a girl named Eliza who in her real life is kind of ostracized in her high school, doesn't really have any friends, and is bullied and just pretty much the outcast. Most of her friends are online, and she's also the creator of one of the most popular webcomics out there, which is called Monstrous Sea. And she even has made a business out of it. She has made her own money out of it, which I thought was really interesting to read about. Then a new boy comes to her school, and he happens to be Monstrous Sea's most popular fan fiction writer and a huge fan of her webcomic, but he doesn't know who she is. And it's about them kind of building this friendship and eventually a romantic relationship. But then her identity as the creator of Monstrous Sea is exposed, and it's about her kind of dealing with that. I just loved this book so much. I think it captures the experience of being a teenager, high school, having crushes, figuring out who you are, overcoming self-doubt, things like that. It was just amazing, and I ended up giving this book 5 out of 5 stars. So after Eliza and Her Monsters, I was still not really in the mood to pick up anything on my TBR cart that I had. everything just kind of seemed a little too heavy for me, and so I ended up picking up something to reread, and that was Air of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. I am so happy that I reread this book. This book is book 3 in Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series, and I can't really say what this book specifically is about just because it's book 3 and it would kind of spoil things for anyone who has not read books 1 and 2, but the Throne of Glass series revolves around this girl named Selena, who is a trained assassin and a prisoner in a prison, obviously, and she is kind of elected to partake in this competition to become the king's assassin. And it's about her going through that competition, but also learning more about her past and who she is, and trying to make it and survive in this competition and in the king's court. And there's magic and other things that I don't know if they're spoilers or not, but it's a high fantasy series. If you're willing to read high fantasy and you've not read the series yet, I highly recommend it. I forgot so much that happens in this series until I read this book, and I am just stoked to be rereading it. I kind of messed up though because I read this book right at the end of April, and May is obviously the Asian readathon month, so I'm prioritizing my Asian readathon books. So I'm not going to be picking up Queen of Shadows, which is book 4, until I read my Asian books, but I am so excited to pick up Queen of Shadows and just continue with this series and relive it, and then finally get to Kingdom of Ash, which I just ordered a couple weeks ago, and that's the final book in the series, and I'm just ready to read it, and I'm so excited. So originally I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars when I first read it like 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't know why, because this time I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, so yeah, highly, highly recommend. And those are all the books that I read for the month of April. If you want to let me know what you read for April, please do. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd also love to hear what you're currently reading or planning to read for the month of May. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.